Romeoville greeted a new day with its usual tranquility. The hum of a coffee machine echoed softly from the small kitchen. Zarida Bartolomei stood by the sink, her gaze following sunbeams streaming through the window, spreading golden light across the dining table where her two sons giggled and played. Alberto Rolone, her husband, entered the room with his characteristic busyness. One hand held a newspaper, the other lifted a steaming cup of coffee. He leaned in close, leaving a light kiss on her forehead. A simple, happy moment. Yet deep inside Zarida, complex emotions simmered. Once, their love had burned fiercely, their happiness as vibrant as any couple's. But over time, the stability of their marriage began to feel like a cage trapping her emotions. Alberto remained the kind-hearted and dedicated man she had fallen in love with, but Zarida longed for something more, something that broke free of the mundane rhythm of their life. She couldn't quite articulate the emptiness within her, only that it grew larger by the day, like a shadow devouring everything in its path. That afternoon, during a company conference, Zarida chose a seat near the back of the auditorium where she could quietly observe without drawing attention. She had no idea her gaze would be drawn to Nathaniel Huey Jr. Nate sat a few rows away, his demeanor distant yet exuding an enigmatic charm. His gray suit accentuated his sharp features, but it was the sorrow in his eyes that captivated her. Zarida couldn't look away, and when their eyes met, her heart skipped a beat. A strange and unfamiliar feeling surged through her. She tried to push thoughts of Nate out of her mind after the conference, but his image and the fleeting words they exchanged lingered. Days later, messages from Nate began to appear. At first, they were polite inquiries about work, but soon their conversations turned personal. When they finally met at a small cafe, Zarida felt a rush of excitement she hadn't experienced in years. Their relationship deepened with time. Alongside the passion came a gnawing sense of unease. Every time Zarida returned home, seeing Alberto's trusting smile and the innocent eyes of her children, she felt like she was betraying everything she once held dear. Yet she couldn't stop. Nate was like a flame, dangerous but irresistibly alluring. In the weeks that followed, Zarida and Nate's meetings grew more frequent. What had begun as discreet conversations turned into secret rendezvous at cafes and secluded hotels. Zarida, who once lived solely for her family, now found herself swept up in a whirlwind of emotions she could no longer control. But not everything was smooth. Nate began receiving anonymous messages, initially vague warnings, but gradually more personal. One particularly chilling text read, "She doesn't love you. She's just using you." Nate tried to dismiss it, but the seed of doubt had already taken root. One evening, as he drove home, he noticed a car tailing him. Its headlights glared in his rearview mirror, matching his every turn. Nate sped up, but the car stayed close. As he swerved into a dark alley, the car stopped. A man emerged from the shadows, his voice low and gravelly. "Be careful, Nate. You have no idea what you're getting yourself into." Before Nate could respond, the man disappeared, leaving him shaken. Meanwhile, Irma Linda Palomo, once considered Nate's perfect fiancée, had been quietly pulling strings. Irma's jealousy wasn't merely emotional. It was tactical, calculated. Her chaotic upbringing in a dysfunctional family had honed her skills in reading and manipulating others. To Irma, love wasn't about connection. It was a game she had to win at all costs. She built an intricate web of lies. Anonymous messages, doctored photos, and forged audio recordings were all part of her arsenal to destabilize Nate's already fragile psyche. Irma's goal wasn't just to ruin Nate and Zarida's relationship. She wanted Nate back under her control, proving that he still belonged to her. One afternoon, Zarida received an unmarked envelope at her doorstep. Inside was a photograph of her and Nate at a cafe, taken surreptitiously. The dim lighting and grainy quality couldn't obscure their faces. Beneath the photo was a scrawled message in bold red letters. "You think you can hide forever?" Her heart pounded in fear. She grabbed her phone and sent a message to Nate, but there was no response. That day, Zarida couldn't focus on anything. Her gaze repeatedly drifted to the door, expecting someone to be there. watching. When Alberto came home late that evening, he noticed the worry etched across her face. Placing his bag down, he approached her. "What's wrong? Is something bothering you?" he asked gently. Zarida forced a smile, but the fear in her eyes was unmistakable. A week later, Nate called Zarida to meet him at a hotel room. When she entered, he was sitting on the bed, his expression tense. The charm and confidence that once defined him were gone, replaced by exhaustion and fear. "What's wrong, Nate?" Zarida asked, her voice trembling. "We need to stop this," he said, avoiding her gaze. "Stop? Why? What's going on?" Zarida stepped closer, searching his eyes for answers. "Someone's watching us," Nate whispered. "They want to kill me. They said, you're the one who set me up." Zarida felt a cold shiver run through her. "What are you talking about?" I don't know anything about this." But Nate wasn't listening. The lies, the manipulated photos, and the threatening messages had already sunk too deep into his mind, transforming him into someone she no longer recognized. At that moment, Zarida realized that everything had spiraled out of control. After leaving the hotel, Zarida returned home overwhelmed by fear. She couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, and spent her nights sitting in the darkened living room, straining to hear every little sound, as if someone were watching her from the shadows. Nate, too, was unraveling. Everywhere he turned, he saw figures lurking, shadows of the people Irma had fabricated to haunt him. Every footstep, every flicker of light sent him into panic. Irma's constant messages fueled his paranoia. "If you don't act, they'll kill you first." On September 17th, Nate received one final message from Irma. "This is your last chance. End it before they do." Consumed by fear and confusion, Nate grabbed the gun Irma had planted in his car days earlier and drove to the Bartolomei family home. That evening, the Bartolomei house was serene. Like any other night, Alberto was helping his sons, Adriel and Diego, with their homework, while Zarida prepared a light dinner in the kitchen. Nate pulled up to the house, the glow of the living room lights spilling through the windows. He gripped the gun tightly, his steps heavy as he climbed the porch stairs. His trembling hand knocked on the door. Alberto answered, his face lighting up in a friendly smile. "Nate, is everything okay?" But before Alberto could say another word, the gunshot rang out. Alberto collapsed at the doorway, blood pooling beneath him. "Alberto!" Zarida screamed, running toward the door. "Nate, what are you doing?" Nate stepped inside, the gun still pointed forward, his eyes filled with rage and pain. "You think I'm stupid? You lied to me. All of you lied to me," he shouted. "Nate, you're being manipulated. That's not the truth." Zarida sobbed, but her words couldn't penetrate the fog of paranoia clouding his mind. From the staircase, Adriel and Diego peeked out, their innocent eyes wide with terror. Zarida turned to her sons, her voice breaking with desperation. "Run. Hide now." The two boys scrambled up the stairs, but Nate didn't stop. In a blind frenzy, he pulled the trigger again and again, silencing the house forever. The following morning, Romeoville police arrived at the scene after receiving a call from a neighbor. What they found left them speechless. The entire Bartolomei family, Alberto, Zarida, and their two sons, lay lifeless. News of the massacre spread quickly, sending shockwaves through the community. A peaceful, loving family had been wiped out in a single night. After leaving the Bartolomei house, Nate drove straight to where Irma was waiting at a motel on the outskirts of town. She greeted him with a calm expression, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "You did well," she said, her voice void of emotion. Nate, his eyes hollow, merely nodded. "They're all dead, every one of them." Irma smirked coldly. "Good. Now we have to leave before the police catch up." The two got into the car, heading toward the state border. But as they drove along the desolate highway, flashing blue and red lights suddenly appeared in the rearview mirror. Sirens wailed, closing in fast. "Drive. Nate, don't let them catch us," Irma yelled, her voice sharp and commanding. Nate pressed the accelerator, the car speeding down the road. But on a winding stretch, as he took a sharp turn, he lost control. The car slammed into a guardrail, flipping multiple times before coming to a stop in an empty field. When police arrived at the scene, they found Nate lifeless, slumped over the steering wheel. Irma, trapped among the wreckage, was still breathing but barely conscious. A police officer leaned over her, his voice cold and accusing. "What have you done? Why did you drive everyone into this tragedy?" Irma gave a faint, bitter smile, her lips barely moving. "For love." Those were her last words before the light in her eyes faded forever. The tragedy of the Bartolomei family, along with the deaths of Nate and Irma, closed the chapter on a series of unimaginable events. Police combed through the crash site and uncovered a wealth of evidence in Nate and Irma's vehicle: anonymous messages, doctored images, and meticulously crafted plans. Investigators quickly pieced together the truth. Irma was the mastermind who had planted paranoia in Nate's mind, manipulating him into committing murder. Nate, once an ordinary man, became a puppet in her hands, a tool to execute her revenge. In Romeoville, the Bartolomei family home now stood silent. Its doors remained shut, and its front yard was adorned with candles and flowers from grieving neighbors. Every evening, the community gathered there, lighting small candles in memory of the innocent lives lost. A close friend of Alberto tearfully shared, "Alberto was the best man I've ever known. He did everything for his family, and he didn't deserve this." At the school where Adriel and Diego studied, their classmates created a small memorial. Toys and drawings from their friends filled the table where the boys once sat. Adriel's teacher, her voice choked with emotion, said, "Adriel once told me he wanted to be a hero to protect his mom and little brother. Now, we can only protect his memory."